What is the matrix or the reality in which we live?
Yeah, that is the major question. If you think about it, the Gnostics over thousands of years, I mean, going back to the early part of the first millennium, they asked the same question: What is the nature of this reality? And of course, over time, the religious viewpoint has given way to the scientific viewpoint, right? So nowadays, you ask a common person, "What is the nature of reality?" and they will simply point to what science says. And science talks about the Big Bang at least 13.7 billion years ago. It talks about the nature of matter and what that consists of. And in the end, when you ask it for an answer, science will say, well, ultimately, we don't know, but we do know that everything is made of subatomic particles, protons, neutrons, electrons, and quarks and gluons, and so on. But the thing is, as much as that picture has a lot of experimentation behind it, a lot of mathematics and proof, it can't answer certain questions. You see, there are materialistic people who believe in the scientific viewpoint, and they believe that nature or that reality as we know it is simply a very complicated machine. You know, that consciousness is not something independent, it's something that arises out of the complications of matter. Just like, everything on your phone or your computer screen is merely a product of the electricity that's going through all the circuitry. Well, the same thing with our consciousness and our neurons, and neurons being made of subatomic particles. See, everything traces back to the fundamental building blocks of nature. But the problem is, if you're someone who has ever experienced anything anomalous in life, be it paranormal activity, be it a precognitive dream, where you have a dream where the dream tells you about the future, for example, and then it comes true. If you have ever had synchronicities, like repeating numbers like 1111 or 333, or these numbers that keep appearing not just on clocks but on license plates, receipts, uh, magazine covers, mail, whatever. You see it a lot, and you only see it at certain times, and it correlates perfectly with something that's going through your head or something that's going on in your life. You see, there are certain things about reality that are anomalous that science simply cannot explain. And so, in a way, these things like synchronicity, for example, or paranormal activity, they disprove the idea that our reality is nothing more than a cold, mechanical, deterministic machine. So the materialistic scientific viewpoint, it seems like it has a lot of credibility behind it, but it's only because it's looking at a very narrow spectrum of reality. You see, reality is huge. It's very expansive. It includes everything, including consciousness. And science is only focused on a very, very, very narrow part of it. And of course, if you got your PhDs and your millions of dollars of funding, you can perfectly explore that narrow slice of reality. But what about everything outside of that? You see, everything outside of that, science has a choice. Science could say, "Wow, that's really weird that people are seeing ghosts or UFOs or having synchronicities. So let's investigate it." And that's what they should be doing. But that's not what they're doing. What they're doing instead is saying, "Oh, those people are crazy. There's no proof of it, and therefore there's no reason for us to investigate it because it's not even real." I mean, everyone knows that stuff is cuckoo, right? So the problem with science is it's become too politicized to where it's not even willing to look into what is really going on with reality. And instead, what they prefer to do is study more and more and more and more of that little tiny slice of reality. See, just because you spend more time and money in this little area doesn't mean that you're broadening your knowledge. You're just becoming deeper in that little narrow part. And so, in my life, because I've had so many weird experiences as a child with ghosts and certain, you could call them alien type encounters, I started to question the nature of reality. See, my dad was an engineer. Okay, see, so he was an engineer, and he believed in the paranormal, but he also taught me a lot about science. And so, because I learned a lot about science, I realized that these weird phenomena that I was experiencing could not be explained by science. And so that kind of set me on a path of trying to figure out what is actually truly going on. And so when I was 12 or 13, I started reading all the books that I could on metaphysics, spirituality, comparative religion, UFOs, paranormal, and so on. And over time, I developed a model of what could actually be going on with reality. And so, since you asked the question, I'll say it in a very short nutshell. So, my current hypothesis is that just as Eastern Hinduism and Buddhism and certain Western esoteric belief systems say, reality is fundamentally consciousness. So, at the very root, it is consciousness. and then everything else, matter, energy, space, and time, comes out of it. And of course, the question is, well, how can that be? Well, if you look simply at your own nightly dreams, for example, when you're dreaming, you've got matter, energy, space, and time inside your dream. Okay, you've got it all
Mm,
inside your dream, but it is all being generated by your own brain, by your own subconscious.
mm,
So that is consciousness generating an environment. It's generating you in the environment. It's generating other dream characters, and everything looks separate. Everything looks like its own person, but in truth, it is your own psyche most of the time. Okay, so I do believe that reality that we are in right now is something similar to that, just at a much higher and more complicated level. For example, in a dream, when you have your subconscious generating all this stuff, well, here in waking reality, we have something bigger that is like a subconscious, but it's more of like a universal mind. And Hinduism has terms for it, of course. But the ancient Greeks, for example, they called it the demiurge. And the demiurge is simply the soul or subconscious of the universe that projects reality as we know it. So, but then, of course, another question arises, which is, well, if everything is generated out of consciousness, then how is it that you can have the laws of physics that are very mathematical, that are
mm,
very rigid? You know, how is it that if you're not looking at something, everything behind you still exists? You know, if you're not thinking about the floor, you don't fall through the floor.
mm,
There's
mm,
always something there. If you go to sleep and you're unconscious, well, you wake up back in your bed, you didn't like disappear from reality.
mm,
So clearly, despite everything seeming to be made of consciousness, there is a very rigid rule structure to it as well.
mm,
And so, what I think is going on there is that within the greater infinite mind that is projecting all of this, a part of it has been programmed, has been very, very rigidly programmed to act almost as like a frozen dream, or the occultists would call it a thought form, which is a construct made of thought that has very defined rules and behaviors to it. And it seems to me almost as if part of the universal consciousness, which is normally very free flowing and dreamlike, okay, part of it has been programmed and held in place very strongly, that you get this very persistent illusion that we call reality.
mm,
And so when the ancients talk about this thing called the demiurge, what they're really talking about is this programmed part of a greater, more fluid field of consciousness. Okay.
okay.
And so the reality that we exist in right now, most of it is very rigid. Most of it has a lot of physics to it. That's why you can go into a laboratory and you can explore subatomic particles and you can derive the equations from it. However, that doesn't mean that that's what reality is. That simply means that those are the rules of the dream, of the fiction that we are existing within.
Mm,
Right? So if you think about that concept, what you will then realize is that, okay, well, if reality has all these rules and structures behind it, then what about things like synchronicities, or your subconscious wishes and desires manifesting? You know, manifesting is a whole practice in itself, where you simply focus on your desire, your wish, and if you put enough energy into it, it appears in your life. You know, the things can usually come true in a very mysterious way. See, those things I don't think can be explained by physics, because they are using the aspect of the universal fluid consciousness that isn't defined by mathematics. It is simply pure consciousness, pure thought. And so sometimes the everything that is outside this demiurge matrix construct, sometimes some of that can bleed into here. Sometimes the dream can reveal itself and can reveal that, that there is a very interesting aspect of reality that is more fluid, symbolic, meaning, emotions based, versus the more left brain type functions, which are more like mathematics, rules, logic, physics, science, and so on. Right. So our reality has two aspects to it. Part of it is definitely more fluid consciousness, and the other part is more programmed. And that, I think, describes the two aspects of what we would call the matrix.